So today's the second episode of the Path to Perfection. We're back with the switch again, but I'm going to take some of the ideas I had in my last video and then try them out in a new experiment for us today. So today's experiment is we're going to be using the 01V60 on the switch. And then instead of doing like 5 parts of water, I'm going to try to minimize the amount of water we're going to need to pour to actually brew a coffee. Now, coffee grinds absorb 2 times its weight, so if we do 2 times at the bottom, technically over a long enough duration, once everything's fully absorbed, the water should be fully absorbed. Now I tried this and it becomes way too dry, so we're going to show it with 3 parts of water. I'm going to use 20 grams of beans and 60 grams of water to start, and you're going to see how much better of an improvement you're going to actually have from this as opposed to starting with 100 grams of water. So once again, we're just going to start with the water first. Make sure your valve is closed. And this is boiling water, by the way, once again. So 60 grams of water first, okay? And then we sprinkle on the grinds. So instead of what we did the other day, which is where we poured water directly on top of it, I just want you guys to actually stir it in. I actually discovered that stirring it like this is the least agitating form. Now you guys can actually try this without the paper filter just to see it. But you're going to notice that with this amount of liquids, that the beans just kind of become a lot more evenly dispersed, and it's a lot more gentle. By stirring it in, you get a much more even kind of distribution of the liquids. And because there's very little water, or I would like to say almost the perfect amount of water for this amount of beans, we're going to have one of the most gentle and uniform. See, you can see how the top is very just gently kind of like laid out. Now we're going to let this sit for, I don't know, like a minute or two, and we'll come back to it, okay? So in theory, this is kind of like a bloom, and I know I'm like the single pour kind of guy, but let's talk about that in a bit. Now, because this has kind of gotten all darker and everything, if I were to stir now, things would probably sink to the bottom. So to actually have the least agitation, we're going to do a pour just down the middle. And then kind of pour as slowly as you can. Watch the gases kind of travel upwards, and then also notice that there's a lot of gases on the side. That means that the bed is about to break. So there it is. Once it breaks, you can kind of move to the edges. So we're gonna do about 100 grams. Total is 160 right now, and I'm actually gonna stir from the beginning of this pour to the end of it. Because we let it sit for 3 minutes in the perfect amount of water, we actually prepped the coffee to be fully extracted with the least amount of water. And by stirring it from beginning to end, I'm allowing as much of the oils to pass through as possible. And yes, I am hitting the very bottom. Just got to be very careful not to kind of break the filter paper. Now with the 01 size, if you do it like this, the drain rate is actually fairly quick. You would have thought that this would actually kind of like clog, but no, it doesn't. Watch. Look at how kind of chunky the top is at the end of everything. So there's no clogging, and that's kind of like the end of that brew. It's actually a very good looking kind of bed. So we're gonna taste this, and then we're also going to kind of brew a little bit more through that just to see what it tastes like. Anyways, yeah. Okay, so here's the finished coffee. I mean, it's actually a pretty unique brew. This is a 1-to-8 ratio, so 20 grams of beans to 160 grams of water in. Now, because coffee absorbs about, 20%, or sorry, 2 times its own weight, I'm expecting about 40 grams of liquids to be absorbed. So we're just going to do a quick test. Now, I'm going to pour the liquids out. There is 126 grams in here. So we lost about 33.6 grams, which is about so it's like a 16%, I guess. Or no, that's not how math works. It's a 1.6 times instead of a 2x of its weight. It's 1.66 of its weight. So that's actually nice to know. Now we know exactly how much the coffee absorbs, or maybe I just didn't put enough water through the whole thing. So In fact, what I do want to do, aside from just tasting it, is I actually want to also just pour another like 60 grams of liquids, or maybe let's do 100 grams of coffee, and then we'll see what the color of everything looks like. Okay, so while this is kind of doing that, let's just taste the coffee while I'm at it. So that's actually a really delicious cup of coffee. Wow, that's actually really good. So interestingly enough, that's got a lot of flavors. It's got a lot of great textures. It's got a lot of sweetness to it. If I were to add some water to it, maybe dilute it, maybe not make it so strong. That's a great cup of coffee. So the 1 to 8 is actually tasting very good. It's actually probably one of my more favorite coffees. This is something similar to what I would drink from like a long espresso. So am I saying that the Hario switch could actually make a long espresso? Yes, but there's still less oils because longer espressos have, they use a metal filter, so it doesn't come out quite as clean. But this is a very good kind of like replication of it, almost fairly precisely, I think. So in terms of like just stirring in the grinds, let's talk about that quickly. I think stirring in the grinds is probably the most gentle way to do it. You can see that the puck is kind of being submerged, but with just enough water so that it doesn't kind of float or sink. And then it's important that you wait, so to kind of quote unquote degas. Now this is a fairly fresh coffee, that's why I kind of waited for a little bit longer. Does this mean blooming is necessary? I think if you're going to be using 300 grams of water, blooming would be less necessary, but I do think you have to pour slower. So a little bit difference between kind of stirring in versus blooming is the pour itself, I find, has probably one of the most, it influences clogging the most, because pouring the water in, especially from a faster or a higher point, it dislodges the microfines faster than ever. Now, when you stir the grinds in, the reason there isn't much clogging, you would have thought that with all this waiting and all this stirring, the coffee would actually take quite a while to drain, but you could see it was fairly granular, and it didn't, in fact, take a long time to drain. And that's because I didn't pour from a very high spot, and I didn't pour very quickly. That's why the 0-1 is actually the device of choice. It's because you can actually pour the closest to the coffee bed, which allows you to dislodge the least amount of microfines for clogging issues. So this is something that's kind of like very interesting, very untalked about. And obviously, for those of you that have listened to me this long, yeah, I think it's a very important thing to know, actually, that the reason why the 0-1 or like something like the small origami reigns supreme, in my opinion, is because you can pour from a closer vantage point, and therefore you dislodge less microfines. So from this particular experiment, I would confirm that the 0-1 is the best dripper to work with. As for kettles, we'd probably have to think about a different kind of kettle. I think this kettle creates too much horizontal movement. There are more vertical kettles we could be pouring from, and those ones would have less, it would create less of a spin. Not that that matters a lot, but if we're chasing the peak of perfection, I think this is something that's kind of interesting to think about. Now, I think in the next video, I'm probably going to talk about how we can adapt this into a non-switch edition, because not everybody has a switch, and I wanted to be able to showcase how not using a switch would work too. Let me go grab a cup so I can taste the rest of this. All right, so I'm back. I've got the clear cup. Let's see how much liquid actually passes through. If there's anything more that was kind of extracted through there, now we'll know. So it was 100 grams into there, and the answer is there's 97.2 grams, 0.3 grams out. So we lost about 2.7 grams, so like only like a 2% extraction, I'd like to say, something like that, you know. In the first part, we poured 160 grams of water. We lost about 32 grams. And then this one, we did 100 grams, and we only lost about 2.7. So the amount of liquids or the amount of flavors absorbed from there, or I think the amount of water that was absorbed by the beans is correlated to how much flavor was actually extracted out. So I would like to say that there's not a lot of flavors in this part just because it's only like a 2.7%. Let's do a quick taste. Yeah, so taste-wise, this is just, it's very watery. It's very thin. It has that kind of like coffee burn, coffee like darkness to it. And so anything that comes afterwards does seem to be a little bit on the over extracted kind of like darker side, whereas the beginning you get a lot more of the sweetness, a lot more of the acidity, so that kind of matches the idea of brewing espressos, you know, if you've ever let an espresso run for a very long time to like, you know, almost like a pour over kind of cup size, but you split each part up, the beginning is going to be very creamy, very textured, and that's exactly what this is like. Whereas this, I guess I would like to think that the rest of it is for balance. But in theory, I think there's not a lot of like the perfect flavors or the best flavors are actually absorbed with just a little bit of water. You don't need that much water to kind of fully extract the coffees. Yeah, it just feels a lot more round. It's a lot better than this particular one. Okay, so now that I finished the coffees, I actually think that this test does kind of prove that there's not a lot extracted towards the end. That the 0.1 does reign supreme compared to the 0.2 or the 0.3 sizes. Obviously, the shorter the better, because the closer we are able to pour to the coffee bed, and at the same time, stirring the grinds in doesn't actually dislodge the microfines as much as the pouring does, and so the stirring of it doesn't agitate as much as we think it does. And all of these factors combined together brews us probably one of the best coffees I've ever had. If you guys give it a try, it's just, you know, 1 to 8 or 1 to 3 and then +5, and yeah, that's the end of it. It just pours close and pour as slow as you can down the middle. Once the coffee kind of breaks out at the end, just move to the edges and boom, good, you're good to go. Yeah, sorry, this is a long chat. I think I spoke for like 10 minutes. But yeah, I hope you guys learned something. I did. I think I'm gonna change the kettle up, and then I'm gonna go back to just the 0.1, and I'm gonna show you guys how we can replicate these ideas with a single pour on the 0.1 dripper in the next video. Yeah, I guess something like that. I don't know if using a switch is cheating in competitions or not. I mean, obviously, this is probably going to be one of the best coffees I've ever tasted. So, yeah, try it out. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching. Catch you guys in the next one. Bye!